Do you go back into it after you split it? Do you go back and work on it?
Yeah, I do. I refine it, work on it. A lot of times I have to reassemble the portions because it won't be like a nice clean cut. So, and you know, it's really challenging because you have a floor full of wood chips, and you just have one chip, and you're going through this. Oh man, it's in the trash, or it's like you're mucking around. So it's really, it can be, yeah.
But there's such interesting, like, variety in the surfaces, you know, like the surface of each one, there's a variety within each one, you know, so I was just wondering if, like, you go back in and really, like, in detail, look at the variety of how one surface looks next to the next surface, or is that just a byproduct of, like, how it splits when you split it, you know?
Well, no, I do, well, it's not a sheer byproduct of how it splits, but I must say that all of this wood comes from two big strips of wood, so it's all the wood grains and everything underneath are exactly the same. So you have such diversity. You can see that it's definitely not that it's not that random. It is planned. You know, you can.
It looks like a landscape too. You know?
Yeah, it is. I draw from the landscape, just with the desert, obviously. You know, very much nature in my work.
Like it has this microcosmic kind of experience where you look at it and you enter like that world of the like cave or the landscape.
It really is, and that's why I chose this shape, because it's just within eye level. You kind of get the viewer stands dead center, and you sort of just look at it within your scope of vision, and you're wow. You see the abstract Rorschach-like image, and whatever comes to mind, and you're off on this little adventure. Kind of thing.
And it becomes like an expansive.
That's how it is.
Like it's an expansive space that's in there, you know, like expansive, like you go into it like the landscape experience where you become small and it becomes large. That's why I was wondering if like you go back in and really look at like the verticals and the horizontals, you know?
Yeah.
Because you really do look at it and there's so much detail in terms of that, like how the vertical sits next to that horizontal, you know?
Yeah.
That's what's really interesting.
There's a lot going on in it. They require a lot of time to view. It's not something you can just kind of like, you know, it is in a certain way initially, but then later you've got to like really kind of look at the size, look in depth, like you're saying. So good observation. Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much.
I started out as a watercolor painter, and then one day in the 1980s in the summer I was in Provincetown, Massachusetts, and I'd always had an interest in printmaking, but never pursued it. And I was walking by a studio on the street, and there was an interesting print in the window, and there was a sign that said, "Come in and talk to me." So I did, and this woman in her 80s, her name was Sybil Warfin, and she made white line woodblock prints. White line woodblock prints are a relative of Japanese hanga. When Japan opened and Americans went in and learned the Japanese printmaking method, it went back to the United States. And then in 1950, some printmakers congregated in Provincetown, Massachusetts, and they were doing the hanga method, which is very labor intensive, one block for each color. And they thought it was too tedious. So one of the artists, B.J.O. Nordfeld, came up with a method of doing a multicolor print with one matrix block. So instead of many blocks for many colors, there's one block, and you cut out the line that defines each of the shapes. When you print it, that leaves a white line. So the technique was then always referred to as the Provincetown white line woodblock technique. And what you do is, after you cut out the line and it's completely cut out, the paper is actually attached to the side of the block with push pins. And the print is done little by painting watercolor onto the block, pulling the paper over and burnishing onto the paper. It may take thousands of passes in order to get the color and the shading that I want. And then the print is done. And you take that print off, and if you want to do another print, then you start from the beginning, not the beginning of cutting the block because the block is already done, but then you attach the paper and you start from the beginning and completely reprint the print from the beginning. One little bit at a time, so it's very labor intensive. master of Japanese printmaking in this country. So I was very honored to study with him because he passed away soon after that. And then from there, I just got interested in other types of printmaking. And so you see the white, black and white print, and the other woodblock prints printed with oil-based inks, which is something new for me because I've always used watercolor. That's what attracted me to the hanga and the white line technique, because it's all printed with watercolor. But then I wanted to try oil-based, and I have, and I've had some success with it. So, any other questions? Any questions?
Doesn't the watercolor dry on you?
You have to understand the different woods that I use, the porosity of the wood, and how much it's going to soak up the water as you're putting the pigment on.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of trial and error. I mean, at this point, I know how it's going to respond.
So how long does it take you to print a single print?
A couple days. Complete. I mean, the larger one's a couple days.
Wow.
And that's after the first time I cut the block, and there's no paint on it yet. It takes me longer because I'm figuring out the color composition. But once I have the color composition, the next print might only take me 2 days because I have all that figured out. There's a record of it on the block already, and the colors soaking into the wood.
What kind of wood do you use for run your editions with the white line?
The white line traditionally has been an open edition because the other white line artists, there's, let's say, maybe 15 people in the country that do white line technique. It's not widely known technique. So they've been open editions, and the tradition was that you number them as you do them. And some artists do say, I'm only going to make 10. But a long time ago, when I started, there were some that were popular, and I wanted to make as many as I could, so I set the editions at 50. Now, the newer ones, I'll never get there. But the older ones, I may get there eventually. So they're really editions of 50, but they're printed one at a time. So
are they pretty tight when you're doing one and then bring another one into another colors and blending it?
I keep them pretty close because I follow the pattern that I make, the color pattern that I make the first time on the block. But other artists don't. They'll make one very transparent, the next one they'll try with wash and make it very opaque.
It's